Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Neurosurgery Journey. Today, we're going to talk about excelling in rotations, working hard during sub-internships, and preparing for the match. I know last week we talked about the preclinical years 1 and 2, where we talked about research, clinical, getting some shadowing experiences, and some other topics. I encourage everybody to check that out. But today, we're going to actually talk about years 3 and 4, interns, rotations, and so on. So without further ado, let's introduce our host for today.
Hey, everyone. Frozen over here, but I don't know. I'm Devon O'Donnell. I'm a student at New York Medical College. So give some advice.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, guys. So I'm Sergio. Grew up in Miami, Florida. Did undergrad at Penn, and now I'm a student at Cornell, for med school. Happy to get into it.
Fantastic. All right. So my name is Kyle Zappi. So I'm a third-year medical student at Cornell. So I have just finished my rotations and taken step 2. So I'll be able to contribute a bit of that conversation. But when we start getting into the sub-Is and things like that we're going to have to bring on the experts. And that's why we got Sergio and Devon here to talk about that stuff. So without further ado, let's talk about from, I guess, where the beginning of third year starts, and it's rotations. Okay, so I'm sure for medical students, we all know what rotations are, but there's a large part of our audience who doesn't know what clinical rotations are. Does somebody mind giving us a stab at what clinical rotations are and what they mean for us?
Sure, I can just frame them in general, and then Devon just add in anywhere where there are gaps. But since you guys have already talked about the preclinical stuff, right? That's where you're sort of learning in the classroom a lot about different organ systems, different illnesses, and all that stuff. But then the clinical years, that's when you're actually rotating as a part of you're an active member of a clinical team, right, in the hospital, right, as the med student, and so you're rotating with the residents and the attendings on different clinical services. And this is where you'll formally rotate big specialty areas in medicine, including in internal medicine, general surgery, neurology, pediatrics, psychiatry, obstetrics, and gynecology, and whatnot. And a lot of times emergency medicine too is now becoming more and more of a formalized clerkship. And so as a part of that team, you're now sort of responsible, in a lot of ways responsible for interacting with patients, getting good histories and physical exams, and then presenting your findings to the residents or the attendings, where they guide you in terms of thinking about plans for the patients and how we care for them in the hospital. And so I was just looking at Ryan's comments. Rotations, and then within them, for internal medicine, you might rotate through different subspecialties in internal medicine, and in general surgery, the same thing. Within general surgery, and so that's in general what to expect in the clinical rotations overall. And then Devon, you can add in anything else you want to talk about.
That was a great overview. I mean, obviously, a lot of people that are on this cover in neurosurgery can sometimes be hard going through these routines. You theoretically, what you want, you just have to frame your about how this can help you in your regardless. Like if you don't want to go into still a surgical specialty, and just learning things from different special patient populations is just third year. But for whatever future.
Awesome. Devon, I think your mic might be a little cutting in and out. Is that just me, or is that?
No, I'm getting that too. Yeah.
It's probably turn them off.
It happens. I think Ryan's tormenting us in the chat, and I think it's messing up your audio.
I'll do that. Sorry.
Oh, that's good. How
Yeah.
about
Sign out and sign back in.
yeah. Yeah. In the meantime, when Devin we'll start working on her audio, and in the meantime, I think we can go ahead and talk about, I guess. So we talked about what clinical rotations are, but what do they? So this is the neurosurgery journey. It is the clinical rotations a time for you to get that neurosurgery experience, or are you really trying to primarily focus on whatever clinical rotations you're currently in?
I mean, that's a good question. I'm sure that a lot of the junior students might be sort of, trying to grapple with that, especially if they already think they're very interested in neurosurgery. But, I would say that the clinical rotations is really the opportunity for you to really immerse yourself in all those different clinical rotations, in all those different specialties of medicine. And there's a lot of reasons why it's beneficial to sort of take an open, mindset, going into those rotations. I mean, one, just, from an evaluation standpoint, for example, you're being evaluated on these rotations, both in terms of the feedback that you're getting from your, residents and attendings, as well as how you do on these, shelf exams that you take on each of those clinical rotations. And so it's obvious that, hey, Devin, it's obvious that if you are, investing more of your time and effort to learn as much as you can during each of those rotations, you're going to be doing better from an evaluation standpoint. The other thing is that if you truly are going into neurosurgery, this is probably going to be the best opportunity for you to experience things that are not neurosurgery, and to sort of make yourself into a more well-rounded, physician and, human being when interacting with different patients that might have very different, problems that they have to get through. And then the last thing I'd say is that, this is still also the time where you can keep your mind open, and there might be something that you really fall in love with that is not neurosurgery, right? And so this is going to be the time for you to make that decision. So if you really start to fall in love with another kind of, specialty in medicine or in surgery, and you can really see yourself doing that either equally to neurosurgery or maybe even more, then, maybe you might want to take down, go down that road into the future, right? Because neurosurgery is going to be something that's going to take all your energy, your passion, your dedication. If there's something, that you can, do that maybe the lifestyle's a little bit better or whatnot, then, you might want to take that route. But you'll never know unless you really try to immerse yourself into whatever you're doing, in that clinical rotation.
Gotcha. Okay. I think, and coming straight off of clinicals, I completely agree. Like, I think that having that mindset of trying to be the embodiment of basically, like if you're on a pediatric rotation, you shouldn't think of yourself as a neurosurgery student on a pediatric rotation. Right. You should be trying to act like, hey, I'm actually going to go into this. Like, what does it feel like? What is the day-to-day like? And, really try to consider this could be what you want to do. And like you said, that's a two-prong approach. It also helps out because you're probably going to perform better if you enjoy it and you actually give it your all too. So completely agree. Also, I want to take this time, if anybody has anything to say in the chat, if anybody has any questions or just wants to talk about anything about the topics we're talking about, don't hesitate. We love talking in the chat. And I can see Ryan's already all over the place, so we love to see it. So in terms of clinical rotations, is there any other tips you'd have to give to our viewers to succeed on these rotations?
I mean, also let me know if it's still cutting out. I hope that
it's better.
Okay. No, it's awesome.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I feel like I feel like this goes without saying, but just do your best, work your hardest, just go into everything open-minded, like we've said, and just give it your all. Just try to learn as much as possible, because at the end of the day, if you are going into neurosurgery, you're probably never going to do these specialties again. So it's your one and only chance to kind of learn as much as possible in this specialty. And so to just take all that you can out of it is probably the best way that you will succeed. It just kind of comes naturally then. It's not just studying for a grade. You're not just trying to impress people. You're just trying to do the best for the patients that you have in front of you, as well as for yourself.
Perfect. Absolutely. And then besides the core rotations, if your school offers a neurosurgery elective during that clinical year, would you recommend taking it?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, you're gonna get a biased answer here. Yeah.
All right.
We would
Okay.
recommend taking it for sure.
Just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page there.
Definitely on the same page.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, I guess, breaking down, I guess, in more detail why you might want to take it, obviously it's going to give you, a better sense of what neurosurgery is like and how it's practiced in the hospital on a daily basis, how the residents, interact with each other and all that stuff. So you can get a better sense of that if that's what you're going to want to do into the future or not. So it's best to sort of do that earlier rather than later if it's something that you're truly considering. And then it just gives you an opportunity to just learn more about the residents and the department specifically at your own institution. And so if you are really going down that road, you're going to want to sort of integrate, with faculty mentors, resident mentors, at the institution where you're at in neurosurgery. So that really gives you the opportunity to do that. And I think it's different when you're rotating as like a M3 on an elective on neurosurgery compared to if you're rotating as a sub-intern. The expectations are certainly different. It's really just if you're, a student on elective, there's not many expectations of you. It's really just, trying to get the residents are going to try to get you to see cool things in the OR and just give you a flavor of how neurosurgery is practiced, and you're not really going to be, put on the hot seat or anything like that as just, as an elective student. So that's really the best low stakes environment to start, thinking about, neurosurgery.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I think if you are interested in neurosurgery and doing that third year elective, obviously there are different expectations. So it's kind of giving you a glimpse into what you should be doing as a sub-I. So obviously we'll get into this later, but like doing your home sub-I first is kind of a way of learning how to be a sub-intern before you go off and do it at other places, because in theory they like you. So they'll be like the easiest on you. So just being a third year and seeing it from an even different perspective, you can kind of start to get your bearings before you have more expectations on you.
Okay. And I too agree. You should take that elective if it's offered to you. And if it's not offered at your institution, if you have a neurosurgery program and it's not currently like an official elective, you can actually, I would recommend talking to your whoever leads your who's the clerkship advisor for whatever school you go to, and maybe talk to them about having an independent elective, or maybe advocate and try to get a program like that started. I know at our institution, a lot of student built energy got our official elective started. So if you want it to happen, there's no hurt in trying to get it going.
Yeah, the other thing to keep in mind is that, so that's the neurosurgery exposure is going to differ from institution to institution in terms of how formalized the structures are. But a lot of times when you're rotating through general surgery, there's going to be an opportunity for you to, rotate on a subspecialty service of your choice for like 2 weeks. And so that can be like vascular or plastics or ortho, or some institutions do neurosurgery within that surgery clerkship time. So that could be another way for you to get that, neurosurgery exposure during your third year.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. And then, so before we get into the official sub-I talk, because I know we have a lot to talk about there. Last stream, we talked about research in the preclinical years and how important it is. Now that we're kind of in these third and fourth years, we need to start thinking about applying. What is really like, is there a set number of publications that you would recommend, or is it more based on just general research productivity? And it's like, if you have like 3 or 4 fantastic projects, that'll do, or is it an actual set number that you would recommend?
Debbie, you want to take this one first, and I'll
Sure. Yeah. I think it's a hard question to answer now because things have obviously changed, right? So we went into this application cycle with a step 1 score and research, supplementing that, I guess. And now it's going to be different because people don't have a step 1 score. So in the past, at least from what I had heard, it was people would say like 10 research publications is the cutoff, like bare minimum. And I don't know if that's true or not, but that is what I was told. And in the future, I think, honestly, that number is only going to increase. I don't really know what that number will be. I think that being productive and having at least like 1 or 2 first author publications and having like your name on things and being able to talk about them is really important, especially during the interviews. Like, that's actually going to be an interesting thing that happens. Like, how many papers are you going to be able to talk about in detail? I don't know. So that's a different conversation that we could have. But I just think that it's a hard question to answer. Sorry, Sergio. Maybe you'll have a more cohesive answer.
So just on that final point, before I talk a little bit more generally, it's a cogent point, because usually in the interviews, as you know, like they'll say like, oh, I see you have, this, number of publications. Tell me, what is your most important publication? What's most important to you? And so you end up talking mostly at length about one specific project, and then they might have like, some additional questions depending on if you take a research year or not and all that stuff. But yeah, that's just the point I wanted to highlight. But in general, like if you look at the NRMP like match statistics and all that stuff, like in the year previous to ours, or maybe the year even before that, the average number of like presentations, abstracts, and all published works was about 18 or so per student, who matched. And then this past year, I think it was a little bit higher, around like 20, low 20s or something like that. And so especially now with the change to step 1 pass fail, people are going to have an increased emphasis on research, so that number is going to keep on climbing, like you talked about. I took a research year, so I did a translational research year here at Cornell. So I was in the lab, and I was doing direct drug delivery for pediatric brain tumors and whatnot. And so there are a lot of considerations for why you should take a research year. And it should be dependent on what are your personal interests, and then what is the rest of your application looking like, and whether you should be more academically productive or not. But that's a different conversation that we can have. I think in general, I would still sort of, hedge on the side of what Devon's saying. And I would say, it really depends on what the deficiencies are in your application, and whether you need to prove that you can be, very academically productive. 10 papers, 3 of them being like first author papers that are high impact might be enough so that you can just really talk very intelligently, coherently, and very passionately about those projects, and you can really come off very well in your interviews, and then that'll sort of, help you with the rest of the way. So there's not really a hard set number, and I think the best resource for you to go to would be your faculty mentors, who can sort of help guide you in terms of what is your deficiencies in your application and whether you should be trying to be more academically productive. Maybe you should take a research year or not. It can really be your best resource for that. I think the other thing to keep in mind is that knowing that you want to do neurosurgery earlier rather than later is always a good thing in terms of academic productivity, right? So you can start working on research projects, either during your clinical years or even during preclinical years, so that you can maintain a high research output. But in terms of a set threshold that you should be looking for, other than just looking at the statistics, can't really give you a definitive threshold for that.
I think there's also one other point I just want to add to that, if that's okay, is that you brought up the point of faculty mentors. And I think that's really important. And I think that being productive research-wise is a great way of finding faculty mentors. And also, if you do a lot of projects or just a good few projects with one person and just really show them that you can be productive, those people will be willing to go to bat for you, which I think is really important in this whole strategy as well. So that's just something to consider too. Perfect.
Okay. Thank y'all. And if anybody has any more questions about research, let us know in the comments too. And then I guess logically we'd probably talk about step 2, but this is not going to be a 7-hour stream. There is a lot to talk about with how to prepare for step 1 and step 2. But I don't think this is the stream for this. I would recommend maybe watching like On King or Pre-Reactor Thani is just a couple of YouTube channels I'd recommend. But overall, I think it's sub-I time.
All right.
So let's do this. Okay. So what is the sub-I application process like generally?
Yeah, so it can be a little tough and a little bit overwhelming, at the outset because there are a lot of sort of moving pieces. And again, I would stress, talking with your mentors, residents, junior residents, that they can first, help you find out whether you should be going into this cycle or maybe doing a research year or not. And then also the junior residents or your senior students who have been through this before can sort of give you an idea of the whole process. But basically, in general for the sub-I application, a lot of it is done via this portal called vSlow, where a lot of the programs will have their sub-internship rotations listed and sort of posted for students to then apply to formally. And that usually, I don't remember the exact timing, but should be opening around now, or maybe already did a little bit, for some programs. And so you basically will choose which subs you want to rotate at based on, feedback you've gotten from mentors, about the process. And then you'll apply via the vSlow portal, to those specific, places. But it's pretty heterogeneous in terms of how programs make their sub-I rotations available for students to apply to. So some programs don't use the vSlow portal. And so for those programs, you have to keep an eye out if you really do want to rotate at those, that they're going to have a separate portal for you to sort of, apply through. But anyway, so you apply through that, through those means. And then in general, you'll hear back from the different institutions, usually, at least in my experience, in about 3 weeks or so, on a decision. And then they'll give you some amount of time, like a week or so, again, in my case, to decide whether you're going to accept, that rotation or not. And so those rotations are going to be, primarily in the month of like June, July, August, September, and so on. And usually for those applications, it's going to differ depending on what the requirements are, from those institutions, but they'll need basic paperwork, just like your immunizations and whatnot, and then also uploading your CV as well. And then different programs will have different requirements in terms of whether they want you to upload a personal statement or a letter of recommendation or any other materials. And that's sort of on an institutional basis. But in general, that's a sort of like bird's eye view of what you got to do.
Yeah, it's definitely not a well articulated process, I feel like. I mean, I remember talking to Sergio about this when we were applying, and Sergio had already applied to everything. And I was like, well, I really want to apply to this one that doesn't open up until May. So it's kind of setting me back. So that's another thing to consider, is that some places have, well, all of the places have different deadlines for applying. And so I remember being told not to apply to too many places. I think I applied to 4. And so I didn't want to over apply. And so I think what would be a good strategy is to kind of look at all the places that you're interested in going to, writing down what the date is that actually opens to be reviewed, because that is the first day that they can start theoretically sending out acceptances or whatever. So I think that just kind of finding out those dates and then picking places that you want to apply based on that would be a good approach.
Yeah, and it's definitely a very heterogeneous process. These sort of timelines are sort of all over the place. So definitely you should be very proactive in, your sub-I search from an early point, even December or sooner, and just really thinking about where you're going to apply and just sort of scoping out how the landscape is going to look like, because it is very heterogeneous. Yeah, in terms of your point about over applying to places, there's definitely different philosophies on that, but I found that in my own experience and in talking with other med students who've been through the process, it's the sub application process is a little bit less competitive than you might think initially going into it. And so chances are, if you're a decent applicant in general, have a decent CV, you're probably going to get, those places that you apply to for the most part. And so it's important to have a limited set of places that you apply to, because you don't, like you said, you don't want to be in a position where, all right, you've already applied to and gotten like your 3 sub-I locations, and then now you have to turn down 4 programs, and withdraw your application or decline their acceptance, right? Because then that can be looked on unfavorably later on in the interview process, or the rest of the application process. And a lot of that is based on rumors and hearsay and whatnot. But it's just better to be a little bit more limited in your set that you apply to in general.
Okay. So I need to be taking notes here because that's a lot of good information. So I'm actually taking a research year in between my application, so I don't know a lot of this. And I've heard so many words and terms that I've never heard of ever. So I'm really glad I'm getting all this info here.
Yeah.
And so I guess that's a point that I didn't realize, that you should already be looking at where you want to do sub-Is in December.
I mean, it's different for different people, but I would say just to sort of make sure that you're on top of things, because things can sort of get out of whack. Like I would personally say to start thinking about it around that time.
Okay. That's interesting. Okay, so I guess the next question would be, how do you choose your sub-Is? Like, how do you know where to go?
Yeah, that is definitely a difficult point and difficult decision. But from what I was kind of advised was that you should definitely do one that is at like a big name or like a well-known chair, because these places are going to be writing your letters of rec, which I feel like is not really discussed ahead of time. So these sub-I institutions will, like, obviously you want to impress them because you might want to end up there, but they're also going to be writing letters of recommendation for you for your interviews and like everything else in the future. So going to a great institution that has someone that's really well known throughout the community is helpful. So whatever that might be, there are many institutions like that. And then someone also advised to go to like an institution that maybe you feel more comfortable matching at. Not to say that it is not as difficult, because they're all difficult, but just a place that, takes more applicants it takes more residents per year, perhaps, or just a less academic institution, just to see if you would be a good fit there. Because at the end of the day, like, these sub-Is are for you to kind of figure out how you would be a good fit for them and if they would be a good fit for you, and also to impress them to get letters of rec. So that's kind of what I was told. I don't know if that was different for you, Sergio.
No, I think those are definitely major considerations. There are a lot of different philosophies in terms of how you should go about choosing them, and it's going to differ for a lot of people. The other thing you might want to consider is going to be, depending on your particular priorities going into the match, you might want to be very targeted in terms of picking a site or an institution that is different geographically from wherever you are for med school. And that would be for several different reasons. Either one, to sort of open up the application to sort of show other institutions, for example, on the West Coast, if you're a student on the East Coast, that you are open to, another location, as well as personally for you to, understand lifestyles are like, living in a different, completely different place in the U.S., as well as any differences in sort of, how neurosurgery is approached at those very different sort of hospital systems, right? So geography could play a role in terms of how you choose your sub-Is. I think ultimately it should be a place that you do envision yourself matching into in one way or another, at least going into the sub-I season and when you're applying, because this is really going to be the best way that institutions can evaluate you and whether you would be a good fit for their residency program, right? You get to show off your clinical abilities and how you get along, with the culture there and whatnot. so that would make for, a much easier transition for the program directors and knowing what they're getting, from that sub-I. The other thing to consider, I'm trying to remember what it is basically, okay, I think I'll stop there for now, and when it comes to my mind again, I'll let you know. But I think those are some major considerations, to think.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't actually realize that the geography played such an important role, or in thinking about diversifying geography. So that's very interesting.
Yeah. So the other thing actually that I just remembered now is going to be that, at least for me, when I looked at these different programs, I wanted the sub-I experience to be at programs that were very different from each other. So I went to, one program that was, in a different place geographically, but also the way they structured their residency program was very heavy into, academics. They were sort of a research powerhouse. They had great, tumor volume as well, which was important for me, but they were really an academically focused program. And the other program that I did, during my sub-Is was sort of on the other end of the spectrum, where they were very, very clinically busy. A very, very clinically busy program with a lot of trauma volume, for example. And so that really gave me, a different perspective in terms of these programs, and really informed my own thought process in terms of what I want to get out of a residency experience. And so that also, I think, was important for me, getting those different experiences.
Okay, and so how do you know ahead of time which programs are more like academically like focused versus like high volume focused? Like, how do you get a read on which programs are like that?
So I think the best resource for that is going to be, your resident and faculty mentors. They can help guide you towards which programs sort of align with either your own personal interests or what you're trying to get out of those programs. That's always going to be the best resource for you. Otherwise, trying to, find out from students at those institutions, if you can sort of, reach out to them either through the AANS, medical student chapters or any other ways. And then also looking at their website and seeing how they structure their residency curriculum. How many research years do they have as a part of their program? What are the funding opportunities that are afforded residents during that time? For example, does the program have an R25 training grant, which is an NIH grant that is specific, to help residents, with their research, right? So I think a lot of that can also be gleaned on what those programs highlight in their curriculum.
Yeah, I think some websites also will say within like the residency section, like if they have research obligations or requirements per year. So that's another way of looking at it, because some institutions don't have requirements. So that would probably be more of a clinical program than more research oriented. So you could also figure it out that way.
Okay. Perfect. So I guess, so my next question is, how many sub-I should people do? And by extension, how many sub-I should you apply to?
Yeah, that's a great question. I did way too many, I would say. I actually ended up doing 3 OAs, so I did 4 in total. And I had like planned all of these out before the SNS actually kind of sent out the recommendation that you should only do 3. And at this point, it was kind of the battle of, do I follow like the recommendations of what the SNS is saying? Because obviously I want to take that into consideration. But I also chose 3 places I really wanted to match at. So I didn't want to like reject any of that. And so I ended up doing all 4, and I don't know that I would necessarily recommend it. It is really brutal being a sub-I. Like, it is a great experience because you're doing exactly what you want to do, but I'm sure Sergio can echo this, that it's hard work. Obviously, that's what we're going to get into at a certain point. And 4 months of it is a lot, and it's definitely kind of taxing, and you want to be at your best the entire time. So I feel like 3 months is like the perfect amount that you can kind of get through without kind of pushing yourself to the breaking point. Because then you like roll right into interview season, or at least I did, the way my school schedule kind of works out. So so I applied to 4-aways and did 3-aways.
Yeah, so I was going to ask, did the fourth one sort of interfere at all with like the interviews and the interview part of it, and did you have to sort of juggle that?
So interestingly enough, because my school schedule is definitely like different than yours, because I remember talking to you about how you were going to be done by like the end of the summer. My third away interviewed with, or my second away, so my third rotation interviewed with some interviews because it was still in October, November.
Okay.
And then the next one was
Man.
like the end of November, essentially. So they kind of both did.
Oh,
So
okay.
it wasn't ideal. But there are some places that did like Saturday interviews. So I ended up just like trying to do that, or like I really backloaded a lot of things when I could. But that's another consideration for sure. Like you want to have some breathing room between those if you can.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's tough. I'm glad that you were able to sort of persevere through that. That's tough. But yeah, I would agree with Devin. I think, again, there's always a caveat. It's going to depend on what your application is like, right? So I'll always harken back to saying, talk with your mentors. How competitive are you going to be, in the upcoming cycle, right? If it turns out that you're maybe, on assessment from your mentors, maybe you need a little bit extra help, doing another rotation at an institution that you really want to match at, again, is going to be the best way for them to know who you are and kind of work that you do, and you can sort of more easily get you, to a match and then to that institution, right? So in that case, you might want to do more, but then you have to weigh against those considerations that Devin just mentioned, right? And so I did 1 home and then 2 aways, and I did feel like that was a pretty good amount to do. I don't think I necessarily would have done anything different or like added another rotation. I think it would have been sort of like diminishing returns in terms of adding on rotation. And so I would, in general, for the average applicant, I would say that 1 home and 2 aways and it'd be sufficient.
Okay. I'm just going to take a minute out of this awesome conversation to say, if you want to support brain and spine education and research and support our troops at the same time, please think about supporting our fundraiser. You can find the QR code in the top left corner at all times during our stream. So please, if you have a little extra money, I know it's hard if you're a med student, please consider supporting. Now, I want to move on to the next topic is, so how should students prepare for sub-Is? For me, I really haven't even thought about what I could possibly do, because I know there's no like shelf exam, like clerkship rotation. So how are you spending your time preparing for these?
Yeah. So, I mean, whatever you want to do, Sergio, you could go first if you want, or I can.
No, go ahead. I'll fill in the blanks.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, like, preparing beforehand, like before the months leading up to your first sub-I, I don't know. It depends on how much time you have. Like, I didn't have any time. I had my step 2 month right before my home rotation. So I didn't really do any preparation prior to going into those 4 months. But when I was on my rotations, I would kind of treat it as though I was not studying for an exam, but just studying for the case the next day. So there's something called Neurosurgical Atlas for people who are not aware of that. It's a website or an application on your phone. So when you have free time, which is pretty few and far between those minutes, but when you find them, you can easily go onto Neurosurgical Atlas and just kind of look up the case that you're about to go into. So it will show you like what you're actually going to see in the operating room, because that is sometimes hard to kind of like understand what's going on. So preoperatively, you can do that. Also, I would look at the patient's like just their information, their imaging prior, just to see like what the positioning will be, which obviously before you do your first rotation, you won't even know what that means. But unless you look at the website actually, because the website actually helped me, the MSNTC YouTube channel, they definitely talk about positioning. So everyone should do that. But yeah, that's kind of how I would treat it each night before. When I had the time, I would just look into those things before the surgery and then kind of just ask questions going off of that. So just asking the residents, like, how are you going to position this? And like, this is what I read. Like, how can I help with this in that way? And that's kind of just how I treated that from the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's all important. Neurosurgical Atlas is obviously a great resource. I think honestly, one of the best resources that I had was looking at the Essential Neurosurgery for Medical Students, which was a supplement from operative neurosurgery and the SNS that really goes through a lot of just basic, like fundamental, neurosurgery concepts. It's not all encompassing, but it's just like a good glance at different aspects of neurosurgery that med students should be familiar with just in general, going into their rotations. And also, of course, the medical student neurosurgery training seminar series is always going to be, the best resource all the time. So definitely consult that your offerings as well through Brain and Spine Group. But at time, before going into your first neurosurgery sub-I would recommend definitely just like reading through operative neurosurgery supplement, that I mentioned, if you do have time. But honestly, the most you're going to learn is from that first sub-I that you do. And especially if it's at your home institute, most likely is going to be, they're really going to take the time to walk you through sort of all the essential things that they think you should know, as a sub-I, so that you can contribute well, as a part of the team. And so then when you go to your away sub-Is, you can also be a star over there, and then they can say, wow, this student from Cornell or this student from New York Medical College, is so great, right? They must have great training over there, right? So that's a big thing too. So just go into it with the understanding that in your first sub-I, there's going to be a lot of knowledge gaps, and you're just going to have to sort of, fill those in as you sort of go along the way. And then in terms of like what Devon mentioned, in terms of preparation on a daily basis, that's really going to start to help you stand out in terms of your performance just on a daily basis, which I guess is a separate thing that we can also talk about if you want.
Yeah, I actually think that's a good topic to talk about because I don't really know what the day-to-day looks like. But before that, the MSNTC Brain and Spine Group YouTube channel is the best resource for middle school, high school, kindergarten. Got to start them early.
Gotta get them early, exactly.
Yeah. So what does your day-to-day look like on your sub-Is?
Yeah, so I think that differs from institution to institution, but just kind of the general gist is, it's like it's very different, but it depends on what time they start rounds. So some places pre-round, some places don't. So depending on that, you could end up at the hospital for rounds at like 6 a.m. So just like starting off that. And so like at some places they will do like sitting rounds. So you like sit there and like go over the imaging from overnight, go over anything new from the night before, and just go through how the patients did from like in the past 24 hours, just so that everyone's on the same page. Then you'll go kind of into the ICU and see all of those patients as a team. And then depending on the place, you could all go see the rest of the patients really quickly, or you could break up into teams and you see all of the patients prior to the OR start, which is at 7:30 usually. So then you go to whichever case you were assigned or selected, and you kind of spend your day from there. Like in that one OR, you kind of follow along the cases. At least that's what I pretty much did. And then depending on what time that ends, you're either there until you could be there until 11 p.m. You could be there only until 5, and then you stay for sign out, or you it varies. It's hard to answer that question, but generally the hours are, as you would imagine, pretty long, but hopefully you're in the OR for most of it, which makes it exciting because that's what everyone is there to do. So, yeah, that's kind of the overview I have.
Yeah, and so, like Devin said, your particular responsibilities and expectations are going to be different depending on where you rotate. Some places will have you actually take ownership of the patients on rounds and do like pre-rounds, before. And so you're the one sort of first evaluating the patient, that day, and then presenting, their exam and their plans, your projected plans for them for their care to your residents before you guys go out and see them on rounds. And so a lot of times, at least in one of my rotations, I was presenting the full list of the ICU patients for whatever particular service it was, vascular or tumor or whatever. So then, but at other institutions, like in my other rotation, they were so busy that wasn't even really like a consideration. And so it was just like you're the person who you just need to make sure that things behind the scenes, like little tasks that need to get done before rounds are getting done. So sort of making sure like you follow up with the people on the floor or the ICU to take off sedation for the patient so that you can actually get a reliable, exam on those patients in the morning, or just following up on like, things that the nurses, haven't necessarily gotten around to yet, and just sort of applying extra pressure for that. Just basic tasks that need to get done. And then, Devin outlined, the main thing is really that you're going to get that OR experience. And so that's really, what you're there to do for sure. So they're going to get you that OR experience. And then in between or before heading to the ORs, you can help with, you'd be helping with logistics, like little tasks again, like for example, pulling drains from patients, JP drains, or doing wound checks on patients on the surface, so that lightens the load for the interns, for example, and you're really helping out the team in terms of the team flow. And so that would be a lot of what you would be expected to do depending on where you rotate. And then once you're done in the OR for the day, then you can sort of circle around back to the team and see what other tasks need to get done before either you head out for the night, whenever that is, or you take call. And so that's a major expectation when you're doing these sides, is that you are going to be taking call with the residents. The particular schedule for the call is going to be different. Sometimes it's Q3, sometimes it's Q4, whatever. But unlike, for example, if you do a neurosurgery elective during your third year, where that might not necessarily be something you do, when you're a sub-I, you're definitely going to be taking calls so that you can experience what it's going to be like to be a junior resident or an intern who has to, do 24 hours, in the hospital, and then deal with emergencies that come in overnight, and then do trauma cases overnight as well, during that call. And so also during that time, if you're a sub-I and you're on call, you might help or even perform, depending on where you are, EVDs. So for a patient that comes in emergently and needs an extra, a ventricular drain, you can help with that as well. And so, yeah, all of that is a part of some things that you might do on service, or some of your expectations and responsibilities.
Okay, so I heard a lot of, sounds like there's a whole lot of different like skills and things to prepare for, and like just generally a lot more expectations in your clinical rotations. So I guess we already talked about how to excel in clinical rotations, but how do you excel in your sub-Is?
Yeah, I would say just sort of the biggest overarching thing is to just be, and you'll hear this, is to be present, be available always, to the team, and be proactive in trying to look at, seek out those tasks that can be very helpful to your team, whether it's pulling out drains, doing wound checks, or doing whatever tasks that need to be done. And then it's just important to, if you don't know how to do something the first time, be able to, after, hearing how to do it from the resident or the intern, do it the second time. And so when it comes up, you can be the one to sort of take charge of that, right? And that's seen as a very proactive thing to do, that, as an intern, you're going to be needing to do things without, too much oversight all the time for every little task that is going on, right? So if you can sort of prove that you can do that effectively as a team member, that really goes a long way. So that's certainly like an overarching thing that, will help you do well.
Yeah, I think that the main takeaways from it, like it's hard to put into words sometimes because there's so many things that go on, but I think at the end of it, like the main takeaways are to be yourself, do not be annoying, don't get into people's ways, which is actually really easy to do. So just try to kind of observe everything that is going on at all times. I think that if you're observing what's going on the service or in the operating room and just kind of trying to learn the workflows in the beginning, it will make your life so much easier for the next like 3 weeks. And you'll be able to actually help without constantly asking what you can do to help, because that also really irritates people.
Yes.
So
Definitely.
because in the beginning, you don't know how you can be an asset to the team. Every team is different. Like going on all 4 of my sub-Is, it was not the same at any of the institutions. So I knew something from one month and then went to the next place and had to kind of readjust again. And I think that that's another thing that you just kind of have to embrace, is to just be flexible and just kind of go with the flow, which I don't think that anyone going into neurosurgery really is good at. So it's just learning how to deal with that and roll with the punches.
Yeah, being adaptable. But that's a big thing too that you brought up. Like, not only like when you go from one institution to another are things drastically different, but also the same institution you're rotating at, you're often rotating at different hospital sites as well, right? Either a community hospital setting or a pediatric hospital or whatnot, as a part of the same sort of institution. And so every time you rotate through those, that's again a very drastically different experience in terms of workflow, where things are, and how to just sort of be a useful member of the team. And so I think one thing that I found helpful was that especially in my home institution, I first talked with the chief resident or the senior resident at the time, who I was also close to, and I asked them, what are the particular expectations that you really want the students who are rotating with you to make sure sort of get done, right? So what are the things that you really need from me as a sub-intern, and then usually they would outline what kinds of things that you really need to do to be an integral part of the team. And then from there, you just make sure that you are attuned to those things and getting the job done for the team. And so I think it's useful to sort of set those expectations at the beginning, at least on your first sub-I, for sure.
Yeah, I think also just this kind of goes along with observing, but listening to what other residents are saying. Like if they say that they hate doing this one particular thing, if you are capable of doing it, just offer to do it, or just do it and then tell them that you did it. Like if it's something simple. And I think that goes a long way, because it shows that you are thoughtful, you're paying attention, and that you're willing to do whatever needs to get done.
Yeah. It's even like simple stuff. For example, even just setting up the ORs for the case, right? Just making sure that all of the sort of instruments for prep are exactly where they should be. Making sure that you sort of help with patient positioning and sometimes patient transport, putting in the Foley catheter a lot of times, but that'll be an institutionally dependent thing. Getting the imaging up, the relevant imaging up for the patient in the OR. Those are all things that, especially on your first sub-I, the residents can sort of walk you through one time so that you sort of know what needs to be done. And so for all the subsequent times, you're already proving to be an integral part of the team by just making sure that process already saves people like 20 minutes or something as a part of the OR case, right? So yeah, even simple things.
Also, quickly, something so silly but so simple, like find the marking pens and the tape, keep them in your pockets. Any pocket you have, just put it in there, because the amount of times they ask you for a marking pen, just rip it out. You stand out immediately.
Exactly. Yeah. Make sure all the prep stuff is just ready to go.
Okay, noted. I'll buy a bunch of pins. uh, so I think we have an awesome stream going so far. I think we have about enough time for one more topic, which is letters of recommendation. So I guess my question is, should you get letters from every place you rotate at?
I think that I was advised yes. For me, it's different because it was 4 rotations. So just due to the timing and also because you can only get 4 in total, I didn't get all 4. The last one I didn't ask for a letter of rec. That was purely for to like increase my chance of matching there. But the other 3 places I definitely asked for a letter. You ask early on just so that the expectation is there, but they kind of know that it's coming. It's just to kind of give them a heads up and make sure that you have it on their radar, because you don't want to ask them the last week when they didn't really know that that's what you wanted. But because there are 4 letters, usually you get the 4th letter from a research mentor or someone that you're pretty close to in the field, because all 4 letters are from neurosurgery, from neurosurgeons.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, I don't have to add other than, like Devin said, a lot of times at the institutions that you rotate at, you want there to be sort of stable and strong leadership, from the chairman, the program director positions, so that the letters that they write will stand out and will sort of mean a lot, right? I think that's important. And a lot of times in these sub-Is, you're pretty much going to be meeting formally with some number of the sort of leadership there, whether the associate program director, the program director, or the chair. And during that meeting, if you haven't already told them already, that'll be an excellent time to tell them, would you be willing to write a letter of recommendation for me, right? So there's a sort of formal, meeting that you can already, do that during. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, I got a letter from my home institution, 2 away rotations, and from my research mentor who I did my research year with. And so, yeah, exactly what Evan said.
Okay, so when you say you have these formal meetings with either the program director or the program director, are those people the ones who are going to write your letter of rec for sure, or is it going to be any attending that you spent the most time with?
So that's a good question. So I would clarify that, first of all, the exact people who write your letter, whether it's sort of written as a group or mainly by the chair or whatnot, will differ depending on where you rotate. But in general, the letter that you're going to get is going to most likely be from the chairman, of the institution. But a lot of times it'll be written in conjunction with the program director. But really who you're getting your letters of recommendation from, it's not necessarily going to be, at least not in my experience, it's not going to be like, an attending necessarily that you scrubbed in a couple times with or went to their clinic. It might be, but at least not in the vast majority of cases. That's actually going to be the chairman and or the PD.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, the residents will, I think there's a space in the letter, or at least from what people have mentioned, there's resident comments. So the residents will contribute to the letter in that way, just because you spend a lot of time with the residents, more so than with any other attending. So they actually will know you better at the end of the 4 weeks. So they have a space for them to kind of contribute whatever they think. But also the home institution letter does, at least my institution allowed people that I was closer with, like the attendings, to also contribute to that. So while it was a joint letter from the PD and the chairman, my other research mentors contributed as well.
Yeah, for the letters, you'll get feedback basically included, like you said, from the residents and the faculty. In different institutions, for example, at my home institution, you actually got paired with a faculty mentor during that rotation. And so I definitely scrubbed into a lot of their cases and we worked pretty closely together. And so that was a sort of natural way to, get pretty informative feedback on my performance included, in the letter from that faculty mentor.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I did not know the answer to that, so thank you all a lot. So I think that's actually all the time we have, unfortunately. The stream flew by. So I guess, is there any closing thoughts that you want to say before we close up?
One, thanks for having me and letting us discuss sub-Is and clinical performance and whatnot. It's definitely a tricky thing to talk about. It can be very overwhelming students to head into. It certainly was for me, just because there are a lot of moving parts everywhere and things are very heterogeneous, like we talked about. I think I will stress, lean on your faculty and your resident mentors, and they can really guide you through this process. The other thing is, reach out to students like Devon and I, who have just been through the process, and I've also done interviews as well, and we can really give you close and personal view at the whole process and sort of help facilitate you along the way. So Kyle, if you can, you can make my email available to students and they can reach out, and I'm happy to answer any questions. But good luck for those students who are going into sub-Is and those who are sort of thinking and are on the path or the neurosurgery journey. Good luck with all the clinical stuff and rotation that go along with it.
Yeah, no, exactly everything you said. Seriously, if you have any questions at all, because I know it's obviously very overwhelming and it's not really well formatted on any specific website. So if you have any questions, just feel free to reach out to either of us. We'd be happy to answer. But good luck to everyone, and good luck to you, Sergio.
Good luck to you too, Devon. I'll be excited to see where you end up for the match.
Me too.
Absolutely, yeah, and good luck to y'all. Definitely appreciate y'all coming on here and giving some awesome advice. So next week, we go live every Thursday at 7 p.m. So I'm excited to see y'all next week. And in the meantime, y'all have a good week. All right. Bye.
Bye.